So the Malibu case is one of the biggest scandals in the history of the oil industry. Shell and ENI did a deal in 2011 for OPL 245, potentially one of the biggest oil blocks in all of West Africa, and they paid $1.3 billion, but of that money, $1.1 billion was diverted away into the accounts of Malabu Oil and Gas, a company secretly owned by Dan Etete. Leaked internal Shell emails that we published earlier this year show that some of the company's most senior executives knew that their money was going as part of vast bribery schemes to some of Nigeria's most senior politicians. And Italian public prosecutors in Milan say that $500 million was turned into cash and distributed to senior Nigerian politicians including Goodluck Jonathan, Diezani Alice Madueke, former Attorney General Bello Adoki, and others. So cases like this are rarely found out about. The deals can be done behind closed doors and no one knows necessarily where the money went. In this case, two of the middlemen hired to help make this deal go through both sued in British courts, trying to get commissions out of Dan Etete. But fundamentally, what's really important about this case is that it shows why we need better transparency in the oil industry. It's important that we know what oil and gas companies are paying for the natural resources of countries like Nigeria, and why laws passed in the EU, in the US, Canada and Norway are vital to be properly implemented so that we can see on a project-by-project basis what companies are paying for the valuable natural assets of a country like Nigeria which belong to their citizens. So we applaud the action taken by US and UK authorities to deal with the allegations against Diezani and freeze these assets pending further investigation. Those assets are not, as far as we can tell, related to the OPL 245 case. However, the Milan public prosecutor, who's charged Shell and ENI with international bribery offences over the deal, says that some of the money that went into a vast alleged bribery scheme was meant to go to Diezani Alice Madueke out of the Malabu deal. Well, it's really important that everyone involved in a scandal as bad as this one needs to be held accountable. And charges have already been laid against the companies and some of their executives, and against Dan Etete and some of the middlemen involved. And in Nigeria, of course, there have been charges laid against Mohammed Adoki as well. It's important that where there's evidence to show complicity and criminality connected to a deal like this, that people are held to account and deals are not struck that let down the citizens of Nigeria who deserve to see justice in a case as awful as this one. So it takes two to tango in a bribery case. It takes someone to pay the bribe and someone to receive the bribe. But beyond that, there's a whole ecosystem of middlemen, fixers, financiers, bankers who are willing to look the other way to facilitate corrupt deals like this one. The fact is that the UK, the US, European countries have a lot to do to make sure that stolen Nigerian money isn't laundered through British, European and US banks, and that where evidence shows that they should have known better, that they are held to account for the criminality that they'll be involved in. I think it's important that it does happen if it can be proved. This money did go through European and US banks, and they need to be held to account for what they did and how much they should have known. It's interesting in this case that several banks did turn down the OPL 245 money when it was attempted to be transferred through Switzerland and through Lebanon, but clearly others said yes to this money in Nigeria and in Europe and elsewhere, and it's important that we get to the bottom of how complicit those institutions were. Some of this has already been published. Some of the banks involved in the Malibu case are now all public as we followed the money in the years that we've been investigating this case. But obviously the full total of it is unlikely to come out until we get into court and hear the arguments from prosecutors in this case, because there's only so much that can be done to pierce the veil of kind of banking and corporate secrecy. So Shell, ENI and others have been charged in Italy with international bribery offences, and though that case is now in a preliminary hearing stage, we could expect a full criminal trial potentially to start by next year. And if those companies go to trial, it will arguably be the biggest corporate bribery trial in history. So we can look to see more news coming out over the next few months and into next year. In Nigeria, charges have been laid, but while some of the officials involved are still overseas, it's difficult to see when that trial is going to begin unless extradition proceedings can be put to work. Well, we're very lucky in that we're insulated from a lot of the very real threats that journalists and activists face on the ground in a lot of the countries we work in, and we do our best to kind of work with the people on the ground and protect those people standing up for their own communities and for their rights. It's important that we are very clear about what we know and how we know it, and we stick very firmly to the facts in every case. So that we can defend everything we say, and nothing goes out from Global Witness without us checking and double checking every word we say to be sure that we're the most trustworthy, credible reporters that we can be. So the UK government committed 2 years ago to making London's property market more transparent. They've pledged to introduce a public registry of the beneficial owners of London's properties, because we've seen over and over again in our own investigations and this most recent case that very expensive luxury properties can be owned via offshore companies, obscuring who really owns them and how they got that money. It is possible to delve into the details and get some of this information, but it's really important that the UK government fulfills its pledge and introduces the legislation that it's supposed to do to create this public registry so everyone can find out where their money's gone and if people are owning properties that exceed their wealth.
I mean, do you believe that the UK government will actually make this happen? Because part of what people say globally is that
yeah, the UK government has committed to do this, and it's absolutely imperative that they get on and put through this legislation and implement it as quickly as possible, because until they do make this system transparent, there is going to still be dodgy money flowing into London, and there's going to be very few ways to counter that. And it's also important more generally that the ownership of companies in general is made public, so that criminals of all shapes and sizes can't hide behind a company that you can set up in 10 minutes on the internet, often less ID than you need to get a library card. And that applies not just in the UK, where that beneficial ownership transparency has now been put in place, but elsewhere in the British overseas territories and crown dependencies, or in the US, where legislation has been introduced into both the House and the Senate here, but needs to be passed and implemented properly so that dodgy money can't flow through the Western financial system, enabling corruption all over the world. Well, we always want to work more with the communities who are involved in projects we look at, and diaspora communities overseas as well, and we're always open to working more with those people, because we can only bring our own perspective to bear, and we're the first to admit that we're going to have a different perspective, and we can provide skills and know-how that maybe others can't, but it means nothing if we can't work together with the people most affected to produce the change that they think they need to see in the world. Yeah, it's important that we see results out of our work. We've been working on some of these cases for years at a time, and it's important that we see accountability come out of the cases that we've helped expose. But it's also important that we see the system changing to introduce more transparency measures to make sure that transparency leads to accountability, so that dodgy deals can be deterred from happening next time, or at the very least detected and caught. We think we are seeing some progress. We now have laws in nearly 30 countries that make it impossible to follow the money from oil, gas and mining deals, and so citizens of a resource-rich country like Nigeria can look and see what companies are paying, and that information is now mandated by law and no longer just part of voluntary arrangements. So asset recovery is a big issue, and one that there's no single answer to how to fix, unfortunately, that we know of. It's vital, though, in a lot of the Nigerian cases that we see, especially given the size of the money that's been alleged to have been stolen and the difference that could mean to the people of Nigeria, that transfer of funds back to Nigeria is done effectively, transparently, and really does go to benefit the people of Nigeria. The problem is it's still going to take a long time and a lot of work, both by Nigerian communities, the Nigerian government, and by international organisations to push the countries that have allowed that money to be transferred into their banking systems, into their economies, to be transferred back out to the people who are the real owners of those funds and who really should have benefited from them in the first place. So yeah, we certainly are willing to work with governments because we want to see change happen, and we want to see governments put in place the systems that will prevent and resolve some of the issues that we find in our investigations. It's important that law enforcement takes action to get accountability, for example. We can write and we can expose and we can embarrass wrongdoers, but really, at the end of the day, there have to be real penalties that deter future wrongdoing by others. Well, I think there's always a question as to whether accountability works well enough, and especially in the cases of white-collar crime and international corruption, where it's so rare that we have satisfactory resolutions. I think we're quite hopeful in this Malibu case that the evidence is now coming into the public domain and that prosecutors are taking action over the cases to make sure that everyone involved in a corrupt deal like the one for OPL 245 can be held to account. But we still have to wait and see how it goes and how satisfactory results we see in holding everyone involved to account. So I think the case you're referring to was a money laundering, a money freezing case in London, where $85 million has been frozen, and we made sure that that case was open to the public so that we could scrutinise what decisions were being taken over what we saw as stolen Nigerian money. It's important that that money is properly returned to the Nigerian people at the conclusion of the judicial process. And it was important that the public interest can be reported and represented by making cases that deal with tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of money that belonged to the Nigerian people could be openly debated and reported on. So the first thing is that international corruption is an international problem, and it requires collaboration and cooperation between many different states, and so it's not something that any one country can fix alone. That means that countries where they have officials stealing from their budget need to be working with authorities overseas to pursue that money and to put pressure on other countries where that money may be stashed and where people who paid bribes or were on the other side of that corrupt deal may be based. It's also important that they take part in the international efforts to bring transparency into both the natural resources sector and into where the money goes, making sure that people in whatever country they're based in can't hide behind anonymously owned offshore companies and stash their wealth in property without anyone knowing who owns it. It's important that, like as Nigeria has committed to, that Nigeria brings in a good working public registry of beneficial owners of Nigerian companies, and that's just as important as having that registry in the US and the UK and the many other overseas territories and crown dependencies. Nigeria can hold up its part of the bargain by bringing in the transparency in Nigeria and keeping the pressure on the Western countries where this money is often flowed to make sure they help hold up their end of the bargain as well.